Life in the quiet suburban community had always been predictable. Manicured lawns lined the streets. HOA rules dictated even the shade of beige a homeowner could use for repainting, and nosy neighbors took it upon themselves to be watchdogs for the slightest deviation. For years, things had remained calm in the cul-de-sac at the end of Willow Creek Lane, until one particular resident disrupted the carefully maintained balance. Her name was Karen, and she wore her entitlement like armor, determined to bend the neighborhood to her will. Karen's obsession with order was legendary. She patrolled the sidewalks with her phone at the ready, snapping pictures of trash cans left out too long or lawn ornaments she considered tacky. She thrived on reporting infractions to the HOA board, but when that wasn't enough, she took it upon herself to personally harass her neighbors. It didn't matter if her complaints were valid. What mattered was that she asserted dominance. And when a new homeowner moved into the house at the far corner of Willow Creek Lane, Karen saw an opportunity to extend her influence even further. The new neighbor was different from the rest of the block. Instead of fussing over garden gnomes or HOA newsletters, he spent his days working quietly in his backyard, constructing what looked like a series of enclosures. At first, the neighborhood assumed he was building elaborate dog kennels or perhaps setting up for chickens. But as time went on, the sound of splashing water and the heavy thump of something moving within the fenced-off area raised questions. Whispers circulated at HOA meetings. Some claimed they heard hissing at night. Others swore they spotted something long and scaly through the gaps in the fence. Karen, however, didn't believe in whispers. She believed in confrontation. In her mind, whatever the new neighbor was keeping back there was a violation, if not of HOA rules, then of basic suburban decency. She became convinced she was the only one with the courage to investigate. And in typical fashion, she was determined to make the problem hers, regardless of whether anyone wanted her involvement. The truth came to light one humid afternoon when Karen, unable to contain her curiosity, peered over the fence at just the right moment. What she saw confirmed every suspicion. In the center of the enclosure lay a massive alligator, its thick body stretched out across the grass, jaws slightly ajar as it basked in the sun. The sight sent Karen stumbling backward, her phone already in hand. An alligator in her neighborhood was unacceptable. To her, it wasn't just a nuisance, it was a direct challenge to the order she sought to enforce. But instead of contacting animal control, Karen concocted a plan. She would deal with this herself, proving once and for all that she was the protector of Willow Creek Lane. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that the alligator wasn't dangerous at all. In her mind, it was just a glorified pet, no more threatening than a large dog. The fact that her neighbor had chosen such a creature seemed to her like an intentional act of defiance, and Karen decided she wouldn't tolerate it. That evening, she parked her SUV near the corner house, watching the property from the driver's seat. The backyard lights cast faint glimmers through the fence, and every so often she could hear the splash of the alligator moving in its pool. To Karen, it felt like the animal was mocking her, flaunting its presence in a place it didn't belong. Fueled by indignation, she gripped her steering wheel tighter and vowed that she would find a way to scare both the creature and its owner into submission. Her chance came a week later. The neighbor left town for a short trip, and while others in the neighborhood didn't think twice about it, Karen saw it as the perfect opportunity to take matters into her own hands. She drove her SUV directly up to the fence, headlights illuminating the yard. She told herself that if she could just spook the animal, it would become obvious to everyone how dangerous and unmanageable it was. She pictured the alligator scrambling against the fence, roaring and thrashing, proving her point. Then surely the HOA would be forced to take action. Karen rolled down her window and revved her engine. The deep growl of the vehicle cut through the evening air, and the sound carried into the backyard enclosure. The alligator stirred, lifting its heavy head. Its eyes glinted in the artificial light, locking on to the source of the disturbance. Karen pressed harder, leaning on the horn now, the blaring noise shattering the quiet of the block. The alligator did not retreat. Instead, it began to move closer, its thick tail swaying side to side, claws dragging across the dirt. Its massive body glided forward with slow, deliberate precision. For the first time, Karen's confidence faltered, but she quickly pushed the fear aside. She believed she was in control, After all, she was sitting in a steel vehicle, far larger than the reptile. In her mind, this was still a test of dominance, one she intended to win. The animal approached the fence, stopped, and remained motionless for several seconds. Its eyes never left the SUV. Karen leaned forward, daring it to react. That was when she made her fatal miscalculation. She swung her door open, planting her foot on the pavement as though to step out. To her, it was just a gesture meant to prove she wasn't afraid. To the alligator, it was movement. Fast, sudden, and far too close. In an instant, the reptile surged forward, jaws snapping shut around the edge of the truck door. The sound of metal crunching under immense pressure tore through the night. Karen screamed, jerking her foot back inside and slamming the door shut, though it was already bent and mangled from the force of the animal's bite. The alligator released its grip and retreated slightly, leaving deep dents and punctures in the metal, proof of its terrifying strength. Karen's heart raced as she scrambled to put her vehicle in reverse. Tires squealed against the pavement as she backed away. Her headlights still locked on the reptile that stood tall and unshaken, its massive body outlined in the glow. For the first time, she realized just how badly she had underestimated it. But Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. Even as her hands trembled on the steering wheel, a new plan was already forming in her mind. The damage to her SUV, the sheer audacity of the neighbor to keep such a beast, the humiliation of being bested, it all hardened her resolve. She wasn't going to back down. If anything, this confrontation had made her more determined. And as she pulled into her driveway minutes later, still shaken but already scheming, the rest of Willow Creek Lane remained unaware of what had just unfolded. For them, the drama was only beginning, because Karen was about to escalate her war. The morning after her encounter with the alligator, Karen paced her living room, glaring at the mangled truck door parked in her driveway. The SUV had always been her pride, a gleaming symbol of her authority and wealth. Now it bore the unmistakable dents and punctures of the reptile's jaw. Every time she looked at the twisted metal, she felt mocked, not only by the animal, but by the neighbor who had dared to keep it in their pristine community. To anyone else, the logical step would have been to contact animal control, the HOA, or even the police. But Karen's mind didn't work that way. She didn't want the problem solved quietly. She wanted a spectacle, a moment where the entire neighborhood would see her as the one who confronted danger while everyone else cowered. She envisioned herself standing before the HOA board, her damaged SUV as proof of her bravery, demanding action while others applauded. In her mind, she was destined to be the hero of Willow Creek Lane. Her first step was to spread the story. By midday, Karen was on the phone with anyone who would listen. Other residents, HOA officers, even distant relatives who lived miles away. She described the vicious monster next door, exaggerating every detail of her encounter. According to her retelling, the alligator had lunged across the yard, tried to drag her out of her vehicle, and nearly snapped her in two. She insisted that she had barely escaped with her life. The mangled door became her centerpiece, evidence that she had stared death in the face and survived. But while Karen worked tirelessly to dramatize the event, her neighbors reacted differently. Some were shocked and disturbed, whispering about the danger of such a creature living among them. Others, however, grew skeptical. They had lived near the new neighbor for months, without incident. No pets had gone missing, no children had been threatened, and the alligator had remained quietly contained. To them, Karen's story sounded exaggerated, just another one of her overblown crusades. Yet the damage to her SUV was undeniable, and whispers soon spread through the cul-de-sac. That evening, Karen attended the HOA meeting armed with photos of her truck and a printed list of imagined infractions. She described the gator as a public menace and demanded immediate removal. She used every ounce of her dramatic flair, clutching her chest as she spoke, her voice shaking for effect. The board listened, concerned but cautious. They reminded her that the homeowner had filed all the proper permits and that exotic animal ownership, while unusual, was not illegal in their county. Karen was outraged. To her, rules were meant to bend in her favor. If the law did not support her demands, then she would create her own path. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her, vowing that if the HOA wouldn't act, she would force them to. The next stage of her plan unfolded in the days that followed. Karen began a campaign of fear. She printed flyers with exaggerated warnings about the killer alligator and taped them to mailboxes. She stalked the sidewalks, cornering parents and warning them their children were at risk. She even called local news stations, hoping to stir enough outrage to bring reporters into the neighborhood. For Karen, it wasn't about safety. It was about control. She wanted the neighborhood to rally behind her, to see her as the protector standing against a reckless outsider. But as her campaign grew louder, so did the resistance. Some neighbors quietly defended the homeowner, insisting he had done nothing wrong. Others grew tired of Karen's theatrics, rolling their eyes whenever she appeared with her stack of flyers. The community began to fracture, divided between those who fed on her drama and those who longed for peace. What had once been a quiet cul-de-sac was now a battlefield of whispered arguments and simmering resentment. Meanwhile, the alligator remained oblivious to the storm brewing outside its enclosure. It basked in the sun, swam in its pool, and retreated into the shade when the day grew too hot. The neighbor, having returned from his trip, noticed the damage to the fence where the animal had struck and quietly repaired it. He kept to himself, refusing to engage with Karen's antics, which only infuriated her further. To her, his silence was arrogance, a refusal to acknowledge her authority. Karen's anger reached new heights one humid afternoon when she saw the neighbor in his backyard, calmly feeding the reptile chunks of meat. From her upstairs window, she watched in disgust as the alligator's jaws clamped down with terrifying force. To Karen, it was a direct provocation, a show of power meant to taunt her. She stormed down her stairs, grabbed her phone, and began recording, narrating loudly about the danger that was being unleashed right next to innocent families. But the video backfired. When she uploaded it to social media, the comments didn't rally behind her as she expected. Instead, viewers were fascinated by the sheer size and power of the animal, praising its beauty and the owner's care in maintaining a safe enclosure. Some mocked Karen, calling her dramatic. Others accused her of trespassing and harassment. Rather than proving her point, the video only damaged her credibility further. Humiliation burned hotter than ever, and Karen's obsession deepened. If she couldn't sway the neighbors, then she would make the problem impossible to ignore. She convinced herself that the only solution was to provoke another incident, something so dramatic and undeniable that the HOA and the county would have no choice but to intervene. So one night, under the cover of darkness, Karen returned to the corner house. Her SUV was still damaged, but she parked it boldly in front of the property once more. She crept along the fence, flashlight in hand, peering through the slats. The alligator lay silently by the pool, its body half submerged, eyes reflecting the faint glow of her beam. Karen's pulse quickened. She told herself she wasn't afraid, but the truth gnawed at her. Every instinct screamed to walk away, yet her pride chained her to the spot. She clapped her hands, shouted at the animal, and waved the beam of light across its body, hoping to stir it into frenzy. The alligator's eyes narrowed, its stillness more unnerving than any movement. Then, with shocking speed, it surged forward, slamming against the fence with a force that rattled the wood. Karen stumbled back, her heart racing. The fence held, but the sound had carried across the block. Lights flicked on in nearby houses as neighbors peeked out their windows. Karen froze in the street, caught between fear and fury. She had wanted proof of danger, and she had gotten it, but at the cost of exposing herself as the instigator. As neighbors began to murmur and point, Karen realized she was quickly losing control of the narrative she had built. Still, as she retreated to her SUV and drove off into the night, one thought consumed her. She would not stop until the alligator and its owner were gone. The morning after Karen's midnight stunt, Willow Creek Lane was buzzing. Whispers traveled faster than the morning breeze, carried from porch to porch and mailbox to mailbox. Neighbors who had seen the commotion the night before recounted the sight of Karen waving her flashlight, shouting into the dark, and nearly stumbling into the street when the alligator had lunged at the fence. For many, it was confirmation of what they already believed, that Karen's obsession had gone too far. For others, it was proof of the danger they had ignored for too long. The neighborhood was no longer united. Where once residents had gathered peacefully for block parties and HOA events, now suspicion and resentment simmered in every conversation. Parents who had once waved cheerfully at each other during school drop-offs now whispered behind cupped hands about whether their children were safe. Dog walkers tugged their pets along the opposite side of the street when passing the corner house. Those sympathetic to Karen insisted the alligator could break free at any moment. Those who defended the homeowner argued that the animal had never once escaped or harmed anyone, and that Karen herself had provoked every incident. The HOA board found itself caught in the middle, fielding angry emails and phone calls from both sides. Some demanded immediate removal of the reptile, citing Karen's damaged SUV as evidence. Others threatened to sue the HOA if they attempted to evict a resident who had followed all the proper regulations. The board members, once confident in their ability to mediate neighborhood disputes, now found themselves powerless. Every decision they made, even a delayed response, fanned the flames of division. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She refused to acknowledge her role in provoking the alligator and instead portrayed herself as a victim of negligence. Her SUV, still bearing the bite marks, became a traveling prop. She parked it at different spots around the neighborhood, ensuring that as many people as possible saw the damage. When questioned, she repeated her story of survival, embellishing it further each time. She insisted that the reptile had tried to tear the door off completely, that its jaws had nearly ripped her into the enclosure, that it would only be a matter of time before someone else wasn't so lucky. Her campaign might have held more weight if not for the growing weariness of her neighbors. Many remembered her long history of complaints about mismatched shutters, grass an inch too tall, or harmless holiday decorations. To them, this was just another crusade, amplified by her bruised ego. Yet even those who distrusted her couldn't ignore the image of the gator lunging against the fence. The sight had lodged itself in their minds, a reminder that something wild and powerful was lurking just beyond the thin wooden slats. The homeowner, for his part, remained silent. He repaired his fence where it had rattled loose, checked the locks on the enclosure, and went about his business without addressing the rumors swirling around him. His refusal to engage only inflamed Karen further. She interpreted his silence as smugness, a deliberate act of defiance. She convinced herself that he was laughing at her, daring her to escalate further. And escalate she did. Within a week, Karen had filed a formal complaint with county officials, demanding an inspection of the property. Inspectors arrived, clipboard in hand, and carefully examined the enclosure. They noted the reinforced fencing, the locked gates, the permit documents posted neatly inside the homeowner's office. To their eyes, everything was legal, safe, and compliant. The alligator itself remained calm, lounging in its pool, uninterested in the commotion. The officials left satisfied, reporting no violations. Karen was livid. She stormed up and down Willow Creek Lane, railing about corruption and incompetence. In her mind, the officials had been bribed or blinded, unwilling to admit the danger. Her certainty only deepened her obsession, driving her to more reckless behavior. One evening, she gathered a small group of supporters, neighbors who feared the reptile and sympathized with her crusade. They stood in the cul-de-sac with candles and signs hastily made from poster boards, staging what Karen grandly declared a safety vigil. They chanted about protecting children and pets, warning that their peaceful neighborhood was under siege. But as their voices echoed into the night, other residents peered from their windows with disdain, muttering about Karen's theatrics. To many, it was no longer about the alligator at all. It was about Karen's need for attention, her hunger to dominate every situation. The division reached a boiling point when one family decided they had had enough. They placed a for sale sign on their lawn, quietly telling friends they couldn't stand the constant drama. Their departure sent shockwaves through the community. Karen pounced on it immediately, claiming their move was proof of the danger next door. Others saw it differently, recognizing that it wasn't the reptile that had driven the family away, but Karen herself. As tensions grew, the alligator remained a silent figure at the center of the storm. It basked, swam, and fed, never crossing the boundary of its enclosure. Yet in the minds of the residents, it loomed larger every day, a symbol of everything dividing them. Karen's supporters whispered about catastrophe, convinced disaster was inevitable. Her detractors whispered about Karen herself, convinced she was the true menace. The breaking point came late one afternoon when Karen, seething with frustration, decided to make a public spectacle. She parked her SUV once more at the corner house, this time bringing a folding chair and a megaphone. She sat in the driveway, blasting warnings about the killer gator to anyone who passed. Children riding bikes stopped to gawk, adults shook their heads, and the homeowner, finally unable to ignore her, stepped outside. Though he said nothing, his appearance was enough. The alligator stirred at the sound of the door opening, lifting its head as though sensing its caretaker's presence. Karen seized the moment, pointing dramatically toward the enclosure with her megaphone, shouting about danger and recklessness. Her voice carried across the street, drawing a crowd of curious neighbors. Then it happened. The gator, startled by the megaphone's piercing wail, surged forward once again, slamming into the fence with a force that rattled the boards. This time, several neighbors saw it. Gasps filled the air as the reptile thrashed for a moment before settling back, its massive jaws snapping shut with a sound like cracking timber. Karen rose from her chair, triumphant. In her eyes, this was the moment she had been waiting for. The proof, the fear, the spectacle. She basked in the murmurs of the crowd, convinced that the tide was finally turning in her favor. But what she didn't realize was that the spectacle had not made her the hero. To many watching, she looked like the villain, the one who had provoked, taunted, and inflamed the animal until it reacted. The whispers this time were different, more hostile, directed not at the reptile but at her. Karen didn't hear them. She only heard the sound of her own voice echoing through the megaphone, declaring that she had been right all along. She believed the neighborhood was finally on her side. She had no idea how wrong she was. The day after the fence-shaking spectacle, Willow Creek Lane was electric with tension. The story had spread beyond the neighborhood now. Videos taken by residents of Karen with her megaphone, the gator slamming against the enclosure, and the murmuring crowd had leaked onto social media. Comments poured in from strangers who mocked Karen, questioned her sanity, and marveled at the reptile's raw power. The corner house became infamous overnight, drawing unwanted attention from outside the community. Karen, however, interpreted it differently. She believed the videos proved her right, even if the world was laughing at her. In her mind, any publicity was evidence that the gator was a danger. She stood taller, spoke louder, and declared more boldly than ever that she was fighting for the safety of all. Her confidence became a shield, deflecting the truth that more and more of her neighbors now despised her. The homeowner, weary of the circus, made a quiet decision. He began preparing a formal case against Karen for harassment. He collected footage of her trespassing, her flashlight incident, and her constant presence on his property line. To him, it was no longer about the alligator. It was about defending his right to live peacefully. He wasn't the type to yell or argue, but he believed in patience, in letting the weight of the law and the truth do the work. Karen, oblivious to this, plotted her grand finale. In her mind, the HOA, the county, and even her neighbors had failed her. If no one else would take action, she would force the situation to its breaking point. She told herself she was brave enough to confront the beast directly, to expose the danger so clearly that no authority could deny it. That evening, under the bruised light of sunset, she put her plan into motion. She climbed into her SUV, its scarred door still bearing the dents of the reptile's bite, and drove once more to the corner house. Neighbors noticed her arrival, weary eyes peering from behind curtains. Some muttered to themselves, others shook their heads. They had seen this story play out too many times before, but they also sensed that something about tonight was different. Karen parked in the driveway, stepped out with her phone recording, and strode toward the fence. Her voice rose in dramatic narration, proclaiming that she would reveal the truth to the world. She rattled the boards with her hand, shouted insults at the alligator, and shone her flashlight through the slats even as dusk turned to night. The reptile stirred. Slowly, deliberately, it rose from the pool, water cascading from its armored back. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, trained on the movement beyond the fence. Karen kept her phone raised, emboldened by the thought of an audience who would see her bravery. She leaned closer, daring the animal to react. It did. With terrifying speed, the alligator lunged forward, slamming its full weight into the fence. The impact splintered the wood, one board snapping loose and clattering to the ground. Karen stumbled backward, her phone dropping to the pavement. Gasps erupted from the houses nearby as neighbors rushed to their porches, drawn by the commotion. The reptile thrust its jaws through the gap, snapping wildly, the sound echoing like thunder across the block. Karen shrieked, scrambling toward her SUV. She yanked the damaged door open, fumbling to climb inside. But the gator, sensing movement, lunged again, clamping down on the edge of the door a second time. The metal groaned and twisted under its bite, the entire SUV rocking from the force. Neighbors shouted, some calling for help, others frozen in shock. The homeowner appeared in his backyard, rushing toward the enclosure to calm his animal. But Karen was beyond reason. In her panic, she slammed the door shut, peeled her tires against the pavement, and tore out of the driveway, the gator's teeth leaving fresh scars in the already mangled metal. She didn't stop to look back. The neighborhood fell silent after the SUV roared away, the gator retreating slowly into its enclosure once more. The damage to the fence was clear, but the animal had never escaped. It had responded only to provocation, just as it always had. And this time there were dozens of witnesses. By the next morning, the narrative had shifted completely. Karen was no longer the self-proclaimed hero. She was the instigator, the reckless neighbor who had nearly caused disaster through her obsession. Word spread quickly. Videos of her shouting, taunting, and panicking filled the internet, turning her into an object of ridicule. Her campaign collapsed under the weight of her own theatrics. The HOA, now pressured to act, called a special meeting. But it wasn't the alligator under scrutiny. It was Karen. Residents lined up to voice their frustrations, recounting months of harassment, fear-mongering, and disruption. The board voted unanimously to fine her heavily for her repeated violations and harassment. Rumors swirled that the homeowner's harassment lawsuit was moving forward as well. Within weeks, Karen's reign over Willow Creek Lane was finished. She withdrew into her home, curtains drawn tight, her once dominant presence reduced to bitter muttering behind closed doors. Her SUV sat dented in the driveway, a mangled reminder of her battle, but now it was no longer a badge of honor. It was a monument to her failure. The neighborhood, slowly, began to heal. The family that had placed their house on the market reconsidered, reassured that the storm had passed. Children rode their bikes again, pets roamed the sidewalks, and laughter returned to the block. The homeowner continued caring for his alligator quietly, its massive body gliding peacefully through the pool, uninterested in the chaos it had unwittingly caused. For the residents of Willow Creek Lane, the lesson lingered long after the drama ended. It wasn't the alligator that had threatened their peace. It was the obsession of one neighbor who refused to let others live as they pleased. And though Karen still glared from behind her blinds, she had lost the one thing she valued most: control.